Now then, I recently made a trip to the United States and had a brilliant time. And now I have a few tips based on that, which will hopefully help you have a similar sort of experience. My first tip is really about traveling to the United States, particularly from Europe. If you have a chance, use Dublin Preclearance. Even if you're traveling from outside of Ireland, see if it's cheaper or about the same cost. It's certainly worth thinking about. What is Dublin Preclearance? Well, it's your chance to go through all of those checks that you do when you land before you even take off. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about immigration, customs, and agriculture. How does it work? Well, you get through the main part of the airport like normal. You go through all of the security, you get to the bit where all the shops are and the food, and you still have to go through another series of checks purely to go to the United States. In my experience, it took about an hour. It can be a bit quicker, but it's still much better than getting off the plane at the end and waiting in those queues when you're not feeling your best. Next, I want to talk about Washington, D.C. I know what you've done. You've looked at TripAdvisor and you've thought, do we need to do the evening tour with all the buildings lit up as well as the day tour? The answer, no. Do one of them and then use your time afterwards to go back to what you've seen and have a further look if you want to do that. But I think you can save a bit of money by not doing both. Mount Vernon, the home of the first president of the United States, George Washington. You can take a bus. I didn't. I took the boat, the cruise up the Potomac. I think it was worth it. You get some great views of Washington and the surrounding countryside. What about Mount Vernon itself? I thought it was well worth the time spent there. You get a really good snapshot of George Washington's life in and around when he was president of the United States. My only caution on all of this, if you have a brief period of time in Washington, then possibly don't include Mount Vernon. It is kind of half to a whole day going out there and really truly experiencing it. So yes, Mount Vernon's definitely worth a trip, but it depends how long you're going to be in Washington. On to Gettysburg, a must if you're a history buff. You really have to go there. It's about 3 or 4 hours drive out of DC. So in truth, it's about a day trip if you want to go from DC and back to DC. If you've read anything about Gettysburg and you understand a little bit about it, trust me, until you go there, you don't get the full picture. I went on a bus on a tour around. The guide was brilliant. They brought the battle alive. They brought the humanity of it alive. And I can heartily recommend going to Gettysburg for those of you particularly who love your history. If you don't know much about it, but you want to go, take a bit of time and read up on Gettysburg because it will help you when you get there. Staying with the Civil War theme and the Confederate White House. It really is in a curious position. A large modern hospital is built all around it. You book online for your tickets and then you have a brief tour around the house. Now, the furniture in it is of the period, but not the furniture that would have been in the house at the time. That's now long gone. So really all it gives you is a kind of a snapshot of what life must have been like for Jefferson Davis and his family living in that house. I then, I guess in a way, moved on to the 1600s and to Jamestown, the site of one of the first European settlements on the American continent. There's a lot of ground to walk around to feel like you're in the footsteps of history, some great displays. I guess my only warning would be if it's raining a lot, it might not be the day to be going, because if you're going to walk around and look at it properly, there is a lot to see and a lot of it is outside under the elements. My next tip you might not see on a lot of travel websites. It's the James River Ferry, very close to the Jamestown area. It's free. So what's not to like? You get a chance to go across the James River and back. And if you're lucky like me and go at the right time of year, I went in July, you get to see some osprey chicks as well. I then moved on to modern America and the Norfolk Naval Station, one of the homes of the United States Navy. I can't recommend this enough. Book the cruise. The guides who talk on it are very knowledgeable, and you get a really close view of the most powerful Navy in the world. Before I go on to the next location that I visited, let's talk about driving in the United States. If you're an American, you might want to scroll through or just laugh at me, but just a couple of very quick points. All the hire cars I've ever got in the United States are automatics. And the other thing is when you're planning, and this really, really is obvious, allow yourself more time than you think. I didn't, and sometimes the days ended up being a little bit longer. And I've traveled to the States a few times, but you keep having to remind yourself that it might look a bit short on the map, but it's a lot longer than you think. Right, back on the trail, back in history, Civil War, the site where the American Civil War started, Fort Sumter. Took the cruise out there, had a look around the island, and came back. What would I say about it? The cruise was great. The island, remember, it's not exactly like it was during the American Civil War. It's quite different, actually, but it's still worth going to. The museum, nah, it's not that exciting. Could do with a bit of a refresh. And on the cruise that I booked, it was the Sunset Cruise. I had a meal. I wouldn't bother if I were you. I didn't enjoy it. If I were you, I'd just take the cruise and then eat out in Charleston when you get back. Right, now I've got that off my chest, on to Charleston itself. I took the guided tour on a bus. It was great, really informative. I enjoyed it. However, if you're on a budget, there are free bus routes around some parts of the city, and you could use those instead. I certainly used them after taking the tour just to go back to certain parts that I wanted to see a little bit more of. Now, before going on to my next tip, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to this channel. I've got loads more videos to bring you in the months and years to come, traveling around the world. Now, what about that tip? Flying in the USA. If you've never done it before, maybe you're coming from overseas, it's really simple. Yes, there's all the security checks, but if you're trying to maybe inject a bit of pace in certain parts of your trip and skip little parts, it's certainly worth considering. Look, I love sports. So when I was in Atlanta, there was only one thing I really wanted to do, and that was go and see some baseball. So I was fortunate. I managed to go and see the Braves. I had a brilliant experience. And even if you're not a huge sports fan, I really would recommend it. Just go along and soak up a bit of American life. My next tip is about other things you can do while you're in Atlanta. I was very keen to see where Martin Luther King Jr. preached and where now he and his wife are laid to rest, and did that. And the other thing, and I guess this is a bit of a confession from me, is I like Coca-Cola. So to go to the world of Coca-Cola was a must. Yes, it's very commercial, but if you are interested in Coca-Cola and also in advertising, I think it's well worth spending a bit of time there. The next thing was my journey from Atlanta to New Orleans. I could have traveled by plane, I could have driven, but I thought this was a great opportunity to travel by train with Amtrak. The pluses of this, number one, the cost, $39 single. Next, the views, fantastic. The minus is the trains are so slow, particularly if you've come from Europe and are used to high-speed trains. I made it just under 40 miles an hour on average was the speed of the train through the entire journey. Yes, slow. The other minus, really, though, was the food. I'd had hope for a really nice buffet car and a sit-down meal. Nothing of the like. It was all microwave food. It was fine, but really not enough for 12 hours on a train. All in all, though, I'd definitely recommend going on an Amtrak train while you're in the United States. So when I was in New Orleans, one thing I really wanted to do was get out of the city, head to the swamps and try and find some alligators, or gators, if you like. I went on a swamp boat. It was fantastic, a brilliant experience. I can't recommend it highly enough. And the whole experience was brought alive by a brilliant guide who told us all about the swamps and about the gators themselves. So a big plus for that. Next up, a bit more history. And after being in the swamp, it was on to the Alley Plantation on the banks of the Mississippi. gave me a chance to understand more about plantation life, both from the plantation owners, but more importantly for me, from the slaves that were enslaved there. They have recreated where they would have lived, and on the inside of one of the buildings are all the names of those who were held enslaved in that plantation over a period of time before the American Civil War. Back to the city of New Orleans and a chance to have a look around in a different couple of ways. First, I took a mule and carriage and got just slightly outside of the French Quarter as well. It was a great experience. The only thing I would say is you do have to sometimes wait for other people to come along and join you in the carriage. They won't go with just a couple of people, which of course I understand, but it does mean that sometimes, like in my experience, I was sat there for about 20 minutes to half an hour waiting for other people to join. After that, even though it was really hot, had a walk around the French Quarter just to get a feel of the area, and I really would, if you're able to do that, recommend it. So you're still with me, are you? You've made it this far. Thank you very much. This is going to be your final tip. But don't forget, you can subscribe to the channel. Loads more films to bring you out in the next few months. The final tip, though, I think it's the perfect way to end a journey to America's Deep South. Mississippi, paddle steamer, sunset. I really enjoyed this part of my trip. The food was better than the food on the trip to Sumter. The scenery wasn't that great, but the sunset, wow, the sunset was fantastic, and it felt like the perfect end to an amazing trip.